This next video is to share with you the precision standard on our Chapter 5 formative assessment. So remember, the precision standard is all about calculations, calculating without errors, making sure we have appropriate labels. So if we take a look at the problem here, it says Morgan just completed a typing test online. Her test was 2 minutes long, and she typed 112 words. Complete the table and graph below to show the data for each given ratio. Be sure to include all necessary labels and information on the graph. Calculators may be used, but you must use arrows to show how you scaled up or scaled down. And on this one, I don't even think we need to use calculators, so calculators may not be used, is what it should say. So if we take a look here at the table, we know that for 2 minutes she typed 112 words. This gives us a ton of information that we can use. So with the table here, to go from 2 minutes to 1 minute, all I would have to do is divide by 2. So knowing that, I would have to do the same thing in the bottom half of the table, which is really the denominator of the ratio, and divide 112 by 2, and that would be 56. So in 1 minute, she can type 56 words per minute, and that would be the unit rate. Then to go from 2 minutes to 4 minutes, we do the opposite. You multiply by 2. So you do the same thing with the denominator, the number of words, and that product would be 224 words for every 4 minutes. And the same thing for going from 2 to 10. You could go from 2 to 10, you could go from 1 to 10, but I'm just going to stay consistent here and go from 2 to 10, and I'm going to have to multiply by 5 in order to do that. Same thing on the bottom, multiply by 5 in order to do that. So 112 multiplied by 5 would equal 560 words in 10 minutes. So that's the first part of Student Standard 2. Now comes the graphing. So I need to take that data from the table and graph it on my graph. Now there's some reminders here. Be sure to include a title. Be sure to designate the X and Y axis. Be sure that you have labels for the X and Y axis, and make sure you have appropriate intervals. So let's take a look at how we can do that. So this is my final graph from my information. So my title is Morgan Typing Speed, and I created Morgan's typing speed because that's what it's about. It's how quickly she can type. So Morgan's typing speed is my title, and then on my x-axis, remember the x-axis is the horizontal axis. So the x-axis is that horizontal axis. The y-axis is up here. It's the vertical axis. So those two are labeled. And the x-axis, I put time in minutes as my label. And that's because the time in minutes is the independent variable. No matter what, the time is going to pass whether she types or not. And so the time doesn't depend on the minutes. The time doesn't depend on the words she types. The words she types depends on the minutes. So the time's an independent variable because it doesn't matter how quickly she types or how slowly she types, that time's going to pass no matter what. And then I put the words typed on the y-axis because that's the dependent variable. So that's the dependent variable. Like I said before, it depends on how much time goes by. If she's typing at a consistent rate, how many words she can type. So she can type 56 words in 1 minute. Well, then that means she's going to be able to type 112 words in 2 minutes, and 224 words in 4 minutes, and 560 words in 10 minutes. Okay. Then comes the intervals. The intervals, and this can be kind of tricky at times. So what I did to figure out what my intervals would be, I counted up the number of columns that I had. I have 17 columns, and I divided the number of columns by what I needed to put on the x-axis. I needed to put up to 10 minutes on the x-axis. Okay, so my maximum value was 10, so I needed to fill all the way up at least to 10. So if I divided 17 by 10, that'd mean, if I divided 10 by, let me try that one more time. So if I divided 17 by 10, I had it right the first time, 17 by 10, that would tell me the size of the interval that I needed. So for every 10 minutes, or for every minute, I could have 1 7/10 of a line. But that's, going to be tough for people to visualize. So what I ended up doing is I just did it with each column had an interval of 1. So each one had a value of 1. And there, my data spreads out, so it's a little bit more than half of the x-axis, and I have some room for some other values. Now, let's say, I would have done it every interval was worth 2. Well, then I would have ran out of rows, because if I did every interval was 2, then I'd go up through 20, 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, 12, 14, 16, 18, 20. I would be out of room, and I wouldn't have enough room for all my intervals. So that's why I chose to make 1 in my interval for my x-axis. Now my y-axis, I knew I had 21 rows. So I took 560 and divided that by 21, and that ended up being about 26.3. So I rounded up, and I made each interval 30. So for every row, it's 30. Right? And that gave me enough so I could put a value of 600 on my graph, which is just a little bit more than 560, so my data is spread out. And then I can plot my points as you see there. So I have 1 and 56, and then 2 and 112, and 4 and 224, and 10 and 560 plotted on my graph. So when you're graphing, always remember to think about how many rows, how many columns you have, and then you can divide that by, or you can divide the value that you need to fill by the number of rows or columns that you have to figure out those appropriate intervals. You can always guess and check as well to see what works. That might just take a little bit longer to do. Alright, thanks for watching. Practice those intervals, practice creating graphs. Alright, take your time working on those graphs so you don't make mistakes. Thanks for watching.